Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. People are crying that the sky is falling again. Apparently, the Chinese economy is so leveraged that they're pretty much in a situation like the rest of the world was in 2008. What are the culprits again? Property speculation, bank overconfidence in lending, and general mismanagement. Wow, have we heard this exact story before? So, as you might recall, in 2008, we got through this. So, why are people worried about China? Well, it's a complicated story. Japan went through something similar to this in the 1990s, and they're still recovering from it. For those of you not old enough, there was a point where people were worried about Japan buying out all the companies in the United States. And while Japan was an economic and financial powerhouse, they've really slipped back down to, I think they're number 3 or number 4 now. That's kind of the cycle of things. You get periods of boom and periods of bust. Sometimes you get a big boom, and sometimes you get a big bust. China has not officially collapsed yet, but things don't look particularly good for them. Here's the difference between the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic nations. We're still marginally democratic. No matter how much of an oligarchy it really is, politicians still do need to be elected, and they still need to make certain decisions. China still uses 5-year plans. Well, this 5-year plan has been blown to hell, hasn't it? But also, Western countries, and this is not due to any failure of imagination on the part of the Chinese people. There's always a difference between the people and their government. So this is in no way insultive to the Chinese people. The difference is, like I said, those 5-year plans. When Barack Obama took over, he inherited the 2008 financial crisis from George Bush because things were already looking pretty grim in 2007. I remember the tagline with housing, buy now or be priced out forever. And that's the way things were going. China doesn't have the flexibility that we do in the Western nations. They are committed to opening their markets. They are committed to making more money, but they still kind of want to do things the old-fashioned way. Remember, they're still a totalitarian government. What the government says, you do. I was dating a Chinese girl for the longest time. One of the reasons she left and came overseas was because when you got your education, whatever, you're told you're going to be a teacher, a nurse, whatever it was, and that's all you would ever be. She would never become a vice principal. She'd never become a principal, a board executive, anything. She would be a teacher for the rest of her natural life. And while she loved children and she's a good person at heart, she wanted to do other things with her life. Well, there were no opportunities for her there. If it makes a difference, she lived in the Manchurian district right next to Korea. They're pretty tightly controlled up there. China has free industrial zones where Western companies are allowed to come in and make an investment, and they keep other ones. I don't want to call it traditional Chinese because that implies like 1900s with the emperor still in charge and everybody going around wearing, traditional robes. I mean more like 1950s China, when they're still fighting a civil war and need to crack down on everything. Well, the problem is the leadership are still trying to do this juggling act where your family lives in one of the traditional zones, and I don't actually know the name of that, but I'm just labeling it as such. So you better be happy being a cook at whatever the Chinese equivalent of McDonald's is, because there's no upward mobility. Here is the interesting thing. Most of China is not in one of the economic free zones, and those that are in the economic free zones are treated brutally. I've documented this on the show and the podcast and everything before. These are people, again, with no upward mobility, who are working in a phone factory. I'm not going to name anybody this particular broadcast. They're making maybe $2 an hour, and they're working 12, 14, 16 hours a day. These are factories that have to have suicide nets out to prevent their workers from deciding to end it all. And that's the reality for the people who are in a good situation. The only way I think China collapses is a lot of the revenue that they have dries up, which is a possibility, because in 2008, a lot of companies, they had their sources of revenue dry up. The only reason they managed it is, like I said, Barack Obama came in, the administration changed, and they were able to say, okay, we're coming into this with a clean slate. Let's figure out what we can do. George Bush, he was a lame duck at that point. He only had a couple of months left. He wrote everybody a big stimulus check and said, okay, I'm riding off to the sunset now. And you know what? He was not in a position to be putting in sweeping changes. It's recorded that he made one of the smoothest transitions of any president to another president, which is to his credit. But the difference is people did get the impression that the powers that be were trying to make everything work. In China, there's more of a sense of it is what it is. We think we're fatalistic over here, but once you've been around Russians or Chinese, you don't know what fatalistic means. You don't know what nihilistic means. There's a reason their literature can be so bleak at times. Now, so while I do believe China is going to stabilize things, it involves the perception of its people, because China has shown they're willing to kick people out if they have to, and they're more than happy to. And this is what their leaders have to take in effect. They have their 5-year plans. This 5-year plan is shot. They know it. But they don't have the same level of expertise that we do in the West. We've been doing this capitalist nonsense for a couple hundred years. We have it pretty much in the bag. We know which lines to pull, which lines to leave taut, and we know how to get the economy kick-started to a certain extent. The Chinese, it's not that they don't know, it's just that they only started doing this in the early 2000s. They've only really got 15 years experience of opening things up and taking business. Now, before this, a lot of their business were going places like Vietnam and Laos and stuff like that. So they're in a similar situation that we are, in that businesses are fleeing their shores and going elsewhere with less regulation and similar situations. So it's all in the hands of the citizens. That's why they're making a big fuss about going to war with Taiwan. War is strangely popular when things get bad. The 1930s was all about war because the economy was terrible. I never really understood that correlation. I mean, yeah, it's kind of cool to watch a jet fighter go over and do its maneuvers and stuff like that. But have you ever watched like a BDA film where they're trying to figure out what went wrong? It's horrifying. Like just the lives that are taken and the damage done. You're coldly sitting there and calculating stuff, but at the same token, those are real human lives that you're calculating. Somebody's mother, brother, daughter, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's the little tally marks that you're making. China only has so many of those tally marks to make. They may launch against Taiwan, in which case they have a lot of people to deal with. The United Kingdom, the United States, and China's nuclear arsenal is just big enough to make sure that nobody messes with them. They can't realistically threaten anybody. And that's the wisest policy, in my opinion. You don't need 10,000 nuclear warheads like Russia and the United States have. You need a couple hundred just so that anybody decides to pick on you, you go, hey, you're going to suffer just as much as we do. Now, hopefully it doesn't come to war. I don't think China wants to start anything that's going to cost it money. Say you will about the Chinese leadership, they know that they're not in a position to spend that much money. And if they do spend it, it needs to be on propping up the economy, making sure people get rice, bread, something to put in their tummy, and maybe an entertaining show on TV, because bread and circuses still works. So anything that Z, I believe is his name, Z does, he has to keep one eye at home. Unlike our 2008 crisis, which we had wars going on, but the Western world could afford those wars. China's trading partners, well, one of them is Russia. We know what's going on with them at the present time, so that's income they can't rely on. If they cut off the United States too by going to war with Taiwan, they're cooked. Now, I will say this. It's going to be a horrible Christmas shopping season. Probably the crowds at the stores are not going to be bad, and the reason I know this, the Baltic Dry. Every year about this time, I take a good look at it. Baltic Dry is what it costs to get a container so that you can load it up and send raw goods anywhere, like lumber, like steel, like anything that's essential. That goes on the Baltic Dry. So generally it gives you a 6-month lead time to what happens in the economy. It's flat. It has been flat for months. It doesn't show any signs of picking up. And we're a lot less than 6 months to Christmas. So Christmas, you may get a flutter of activity, and then after that, we're going into the dead zone. Because the Chinese economy, they're not pumping stuff out, we're not buying stuff. That's not a good mix for anybody. Now, of course, the elites in China, they'll be fine. They're like every other elite. They've got their money offshored. They've got their palace in the Seychelles or whatever it is China likes to have their billionaires go. They probably have a private helicopter on their roof ready to take them to their private yacht and take them from there on to wherever it is they're going. Meanwhile, we'll still be fighting about whether Donald Trump should be allowed to run in the election, of which I have no opinion. I might have an opinion, I'm just not going to say it. With that, we'll have to see what happens in China, because China's not necessarily going to take the rest of the world down with it, but it's not going to be good for anybody if they do a faceplant. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Don't forget to click the bell down in the notifications, so that way Facebook will remind you every time we upload a new episode. And we hope you have a fantastic day.